Hello. In this video, I want to give a quick overview of the structure of the repository that is the documentation site for Chocolatey, just so you know what needs to be modified as you're making changes. So I've got a local clone of the repository. Now, there are some files at the root of the repository. So for example, there is a setup.ps1 file. You would use that to set up and install and configure all of the baseline applications to run the Chocolatey site locally. I cover that in a separate video. There are a preview.ps1 and a preview.sh file. Those are really about spinning up a locally running instance of the site. Again, that's covered in a separate video. And there are some other top level files here that are really to do with static and how the static build works. So there's a loose program.cs file along with a docs solution and a docs CS proj file. You don't really need to worry about those unless you are making changes to the static build process itself. You shouldn't need to do that from just making contributions to the documentation site itself. But like I say, we are using static to build the site. So if you are making changes to the static build process, then those are the ones you need to look at. But for the standard sort of contribution into the docs, then we're looking slightly further up. The other files in here are related to the overall cake build process that we use for building and running the site. So again, typical contributions wouldn't need to make any changes into those. But where we are starting to look at changes to the documentation, then it's all happening within this input folder. So if we expand the input folder, what we'll find here is this is the entry point for the website. So everything that exists on the site, so if we go over here docs.chocolatey.org, then everything is kind of rooted on the ENUS folder. So the documentation at the minute is only localized for ENUS. Ideally, we would have localized versions of the documentation for different languages, but at the minute, it's all rooted under the ENUS URL. So that's what that means is we need to drill down into the ENUS folder. And at this point, we start to have folder structure. And this folder structure really starts to mimic the different items that we've got on the breadcrumb here. So for example, the Chocolatey CLI, if I expand that, then there are pages contained within that. And then there are pages contained within that are commands. So that directly equates to, here's the Choco folder, here's that commands folder, and then here are each of the commands pages contained within that. So this config.md file, that relates directly to this config.md config page on the website here. So there's a direct correlation between the folder structure in the ENUS folder and the breadcrumbs that are created here. So if, for example, you wanted to create a new page, so let's say we wanted to create a new page at the root level here, which is just called gary.md. So that file, by virtue of me creating that file, it would appear in that breadcrumb in this area somewhere. Now that somewhere is based on the metadata associated with the pages. So for example, if I look at this release notes.md, I can see that this order attribute within the metadata is set to 10. So looking at the page here, release notes is 10, then setup, install, and then how to uninstall. So if we look at those ones, then setup has an order of 20, and then the uninstall has an order of 30. So if I wanted gary.md to appear within that logical hierarchy, say between release notes and setup, then I would need to borrow the metadata here. So if I were to copy this and go back over to gary.md and paste this in, then I would create this as say 15. And then xref here would be, this needs to be a unique name. The xref is used to uniquely identify a page so that we can easily cross-link between the different pages. Now we use an xref rather than an href because the xref allows us to do to change files around in the file system using an xref without needing to update the URLs to include that folder structure change. XREF is a unique identifier that means we can link it to whatever we need to. The title, we would change this to something like Gary. The description would be, let's just call it Gary. Now the redirect from is a powerful thing within static, and it was really useful when we were taking the new doc site from the old one. So the redirect from is a way to say there was a previous version of this page that existed on this URL, but I want you to redirect to where the page is currently. Now, this is a new page, so we don't necessarily need to do that. But if we go back to where we were from the release notes, then previously there were release notes. I should have cut that, sorry. There were release notes that existed at docs.chocolatey.org/docs/release notes, but we don't want them to be there anymore. So what we've done is if we take that URL and paste it into there, then static, you saw that kind of white page appear, redirects to the right page. So in all of the existing pages, the existing pages that we now have in the site, all the redirects are in play correctly. So if you're adding a new page, you wouldn't need to add the redirect from attribute within the metadata, but I just want to bring that up to say what was going on there. And I'm just going to say Gary in here as well. And while I'm going to talk about a few other things, I'm just going to run the preview.ps1 again so that we can see what that does. So the structure of the website, like I say, is a hierarchy based in the left-hand breadcrumb expansion tree. The reason that we have those order buys kind of being 10, 20, 30, it's so that we can do what I just did, is that we can insert another page into that hierarchy without having to change a bunch of other files and update another bunch of files. The only one that is different to that is, well, you've now got an index.md that's order 80. What's happening there? The reason that happens is because this index.md is actually the order for the higher level things. So what I mean by that is, if we go back over to the site here and we look at, well, here's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. I've always done, so sorry, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. So the index.md within each subfolder needs an order which indicates its order at the highest level of the tree structure. The 10, 20, 30 that we saw for the release notes is the order within the child folder. And then the same way that there would be commands, there would be a new 10, 20, 30 for each of the level within the hierarchy. So what we'll find if we were to go into the commands folder and look for its index.md file. So commands will have an index.md file. So it has an order of 40. And that's because, if we go back to the site, then the commands are 10, 20, 30, 40. So there's a little bit, it can be a little bit confusing, especially when you're nested deep within the documentation structure. But just keep in mind that each index.md file, which is essentially the parent page for each node in the hierarchy, its order is for essentially the level above. Okay. So with that done, the preview is still running. The other things to point out is that we use a couple of call out sections for memos and notes. So if I were to go in here and search for, say, memo, and what we'll find is that there's lots of them. But we use a standard, we're attempting to use a standard convention. So it's a markdown quote and then memo and then note. You'll find that a similar one for warning. So it's warning, colon, and then warning. So these are call outs that we have on different pages on the site. So this one here, for example, this was a memo call out. So the CSS is being applied based on the fact that we're doing quote, memo, and then the word, the note is the contained part of it, but the quote and the memo, the quote and the warning. So if you are writing documentation that maybe needs something called out specifically, either directly to the user, say don't do this or this will cause a problem, then use one of the callouts, either like say the memo or the warning. And I believe that there is another one which is error. I'm trying to remember what the other ones were. But look at the other pages to see how they've called out certain sections, and then try to be consistent as we're going through that. Okay, so that preview should have finished running. So if I now go back to the browser and go to my localhost 5080, what we should see now under the Chocolatey CLI section is we've now got this new page called Gary. But it's been inserted between the release notes and the setup because we gave it an order of 15. So it was directly between the 10 and the 20. And at that point, we've got a new page. Okay, so static takes care of all of the other stuff, the layout, making sure it looks the same, adding the breadcrumb in etc. What you're left with is just an opportunity within the markdown file to put in the content that you want to put in. Okay, so that's what I wanted to highlight there. There's a couple of other attributes that you might see within the front matter of the markdown file. So show in navbar, show in sidebar. So those are really, do you want them to appear in the tree at all? And there's certain times that we don't want that. So we don't, the roadmap page doesn't appear on here, but that's because it's linked from elsewhere. So it links from other parts in the site, but it doesn't have a specific entry in the navigation on the left-hand side. So again, depending on what you're adding, you may need to look at other pages that are in the same sort of area to then know what metadata you want to be applying. So that's, it's a whistle-stop tour. But I wanted to point out kind of a couple of the gotchas and the immediate gotchas. So hopefully this has been useful to you. I would encourage anyone who's interested in making a change to the documentation to reach out to us on the repository, create an issue, ask questions. Someone in the team will be able to help answer those questions. And then if there's something in the documentation that you think is missing, is wrong, needs to be updated, then create an issue. Let's have a dialogue about it, and then we can help you submit a PR to get that merged into the repository. So in the follow-up videos to this one, there's going to be, well, what are the strategies that you can use in terms of making those changes, either directly through the GitHub user interface, using something like github.dev, cloning and running the website locally on your machine to see it all working and what it's going to look like, and then also using something like GitHub Codespaces, which gives you the benefit of running all of that stuff in the cloud without needing to install all those things on your own machine. So hopefully this has been useful to you. If you do have any questions about the documentation, feel free to reach out. But for now, that's it. Thank you very much.